Hello, welcome back. Good to see you again. So, as is our custom, we're going to start off with a question here, and the question is this: what is the difference between how you work when you have a good boss versus a bad boss? Does your productivity go up or down? Are you more likely to go above and beyond for a good boss versus slack off for a bad boss? Can it make a difference in how you view the work? Maybe the job would be better with a good boss or worse with a bad boss. Who do you work for? It's an important question because we're all working for someone somewhere, right? Every husband has a honey-do list that their wife has graciously written out for them. Every mom, it seems, works nonstop for her children. At work, in the home, wherever, we all have a boss. And the question is, what kind of boss is it? A good one or a bad one? I think we all want to work for a good boss. And truth is, we all have that opportunity, and we don't even have to switch jobs. Now let me explain. Let's look at Ephesians 6 today, verses 1 through 9. And it says this: "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly, as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him." So we first start off, right? Children have a boss, and it's the parents. So Paul starts off the 6th chapter of Ephesians: "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Now, if you're out there and you're a child and you're under the age of 18, or you're maybe in that 18 to 21 to 23 range, somewhere in there, and you're still living at home, listen up. Obey your parents. That is your primary job in life, is to do what you're told by people who are older, smarter, and wiser than you most times. So, children, obey your parents. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. And now, parents, this does not say obey your children. Spoiled children are a problem. And listen, I hear the older generation out there, when we were young, we respected our parents and we always did what we were told. And no, you didn't. Spoiled children have always been a problem, and they always will be. It's not just this generation. It's not just the previous generation or the next generation. Spoiled children will always be a problem. But the children of believers ought to be different. They ought to be taught to obey the strictures that the Lord has given, to obey their parents, to be respectful and likable people. That's generally our job as parents. But too often we see children who run the household, not the other way around. And that's not the way that God intends it. Parents are to lead. And the truth is this. He notice what he says, honor your father and mother, quoting Deuteronomy here. Even after we're old, we ought to pay honor to our father and our mother, our parents, by living a right life, that they may be proud of us, even if they're no longer here to see us in person. We can honor the legacy of our parents by doing what is right. Too often, we grow up and we forget all the lessons that our parents taught us. In fact, when you're young, your parents know nothing. And when you're older, your parents seem to know everything. And we all made the mistake, right? We've all gotten to a point in our lives as teenagers where we're first learning who we are, and we think our parents don't know anything, they've never been through anything, and they're idiots. And then we get a little older and we realize, hey, you know what? Maybe my parents weren't so dumb after all. Well, we've all been there. But then we get a little older and we realize, man, our parents really knew a lot of stuff. We all made that mistake. But let us live now in the wisdom that our parents have passed to us. And listen, some have had great parents. Some haven't had so great parents. Some are in between. But even people with not good parents can still take away lessons and wisdom from what their parents did do well. So that's the first section, right? Parents are the children's boss. The second section is masters are the slave's boss. And listen, we don't have slavery anymore, thankfully. Especially in the U.S., slavery was especially cruel and harsh and terrible. So thankfully we don't have that anymore. But the same principle applies to our boss at work. Look what he says. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. So he says, obey your boss. Obey your boss with respect and fear and sincerity of heart. So what he's saying is, within the purview of your boss's authority, like back then a master had complete authority over his slave, but if we look at the principle applied today, in the purview of your boss's authority as your boss, you do what they tell you to do. Now, if they're telling you to do something dangerous to yourself that you didn't agree to, or dangerous to someone else, or they're asking you to break the commands of God, well then, yeah, don't do that. But if they're telling you within the purview of your job to do something, just do it. And they can't tell you what to do on your personal time. They can't tell you on the weekend you can't go and do whatever you want to do. But when you're there, you work for them. And so he says, do it just as you would obey Christ. So that means, would you talk back to Christ? You know, in any kind of disrespectful way? Would if Christ tells you to do something, are you like, buzz off, Christ, I don't want to hear it? Well, no, when we're confronted with the holy face of Christ, generally we're going to become pretty compliant, right? So he says, do it just as you would obey Christ. And he goes on, obey them, not only when their eye is on you to win their favor, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. So he says, have integrity at work. And we've all been there. I was there back before The Lord called me into the pastorate, and even after, I was bivocational for a few years. We've all had times where, the boss isn't around, let's, lean, let's lean back and talk and shoot the breeze a little bit. Oh, here comes the boss. Oh, quick, look busy. And we've all been there. I'm not going to lie and say I've never done that, but Paul's desire for us is that we would become more serious about what we're doing. And we would do it not just when the boss is around, but do what's right and what we're supposed to do when he's not around or she's not around. And so he wants us to do the will of God from our heart. Doing good, no matter whether your boss is watching or not, doing your job. And he compares it to doing the will of God from your heart. Well, the will of God is that we would do what we are contracted to do. And it doesn't matter if someone's watching over our shoulder or not, giving us direction at every step of the way, or whether we've been turned loose with a set of instructions for our day. We need to do our work. Well, the third section, right? Look what he says in verses 7, 8, and 9. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. So listen, whether our earthly boss is good or not, and listen, I've had some bad ones, I'm sure you've had some bad ones, we can still serve with our whole being because God is our ultimate master. And we are not working ultimately for our boss, we're working for the boss. Okay, we are working for Jesus. And that makes a difference, and it certainly ought to make a difference at least, that we know in the back of our heads that we are working for Jesus and him primarily, first and foremost. Now, he says something interesting here, because we think of rewards only in terms of ministry engagement, right? Crowns and things like that. We always think of the work of the ministry, of preaching the gospel, of taking care of the sick and the hungry and the poor and all that. And that's a big part of it. But look what he says. Because you know, verse 8, that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. But notice here what he says. The Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do. Well, whatever the circumstances of our work, it doesn't really matter. God is more concerned with whether or not we are working with integrity and being excellent witnesses to his goodness, or whether we're just doing the bare minimum to get by, and so bringing shame on the name of Christ. Because it's not unheard of for a very diligent person, a very diligent worker who knows Christ, it's not unheard of to lead co-workers and bosses to Jesus from the testimony of being a good worker. And ultimately, that's our goal, isn't it, in everything in life. We go to work not just to make money, to eat and live, but to be a good example of who Jesus is to our bosses and our coworkers and other people. And that's part of the mission. That's why Paul says, hey, there's a reward there when you do those things. A heavenly reward, a lasting reward. So yeah, we get our paycheck, and that puts food on our table and roofs over our heads and electricity and all that stuff. And yeah, we do that. And that's part of the reward. That's what we get, that we agreed to. But the other part of that is the heavenly reward, that when we're diligent and we work with integrity, God rewards us eternally for that. And so he finishes out. He says, "And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him." Look, there's no partiality with God. Okay? If you're a boss and you have people working under you, treat them well. Understand that no one, when he says there's no partiality, there's no favoritism with God, what he's saying is, ultimately, no one is favored because of their high station in life. From God's perspective, so high above us, we're all pretty low. He's so high above us that the greatest discrepancy between the poorest, weakest, least influential person on earth and the most rich and powerful and influential person on earth looks infinitesimal in his eyes. You know, we would look at Bill Gates and say he's rich and powerful and whatever, and then we look at, you know, the homeless guy down the street and we think there's a huge gulf, because from our perspective, we're looking at the wide difference between those two things. But from God's perspective, so high above us, the difference between Bill Gates and the homeless guy is almost like nothing. It's a hair's breadth. And so God doesn't treat anybody. Nobody gets special treatment. Nobody gets favoritism. God doesn't play that game. Ultimately, I guess what we want to walk away from this with is this. How do we serve effectively? Well, the thing is, we need to be great examples of Christ, of his love, of his faithfulness, of his integrity, of his righteousness. And we need to serve whatever we do, wherever we work, whoever our boss is, whoever the owner of our company is. We need to work and serve as if, not that we're serving a person, but we're serving Christ. That in our boss we see this person that I'm working under is not the person that's important. I listen to what they tell me to do and I obey them in the purview of their authority, but I'm ultimately working for Christ and being his example. Now, if we're doing that, we're always going to have the right attitude about work, and we're always going to be working hard because we want to please Christ. So listen, I'm glad you were here today. I hope that this has been a blessing to you. And as always, if you would share it to friends and family on Facebook, or leave us a comment, let us know how this affected you, how this touched you. We would love to hear from you. Thank you. Have a great day. God bless.